start this off, we're going to have Chris Curry join us, Senior Vice President with Howard Hughes Corporation. He's been a great partner to AGS, and when we were putting this thing together, you know, in having this discussion with Chris, realized he literally builds cities. So who better to have kick us off for this session than Chris? And then put your thinking caps on, because we're going to spend a good half an hour, 40 minutes just doing Q&A. So, Chris, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Chris. Chris sent me that video from the Media Lab a couple weeks ago. I read it, and it moved me. I actually thought that he was onto something. I called him. Haven't heard from him yet. So part of engaging with the business community is to return the call. I'm sure I'll get a hold of him. But funny thing is, I want to just share with you a frame of reference of who Howard Hughes is and why I'm talking to you. And I really appreciate being invited. You know, I looked at the ambitious program, and I'm happy to participate. And there's a lot of smart people in this room. I'm just a simple developer trying to make a buck by building something that someone wants to use or either pay rent for or buy. But all I want to do is really share some ideas and trends that hopefully will help spur the discussion. And so one of the things I'd like to do first is to explain to you, where our knowledge base comes from. We're a New York Stock Exchange company. We're in residential development, mixed-use development, hospitality, office, retail. We build master plan communities. I'll share you some of them in a little bit. Operating properties, and we call strategic developments. We have about 45 million square foot pipeline in our MPC and our strategic development properties. So one of the things I'm going to show this now, and I'm going to show a little bit later, and it's hard for me to read from where I'm standing, but the couple things that we think are very important for the next 35 years especially is millennials are going to become the dominant demographic group in the United States if they're not already. Many of us in the private sector are actually starting to focus our energies on attracting millennials, whether it be in the office space because they're all our new employees, or they're starting to think about buying homes, or they're now changing the way we use everything in our lives. The baby boomers' kids basically is who they are. More density, less sprawl, especially, I'm talking primarily about the United States because we don't have international experience, but I'm going to show you examples of what I've been talking about. Obviously, the baby boom led to suburban explosion, car mentality, driving out to the suburbs, having the American dream single-family home. Millennials aren't necessarily going in that direction. So there's also a cultural shift in household formations. We have a lot more seniors forming homes because of the high divorce rate for the seniors, and also the later marriage, millennials basically are not getting married as early, and so they're staying single longer, and that has implications on not only the rental market but also the for sale market. Also, retailers are adopting omni-channel distribution, and the changing workforce dynamics will have a big impact on all these things. So the first thing I did is I went back and I looked at the population in 1980 of the United States, the top 10 cities. I first went to MSAs, frankly, but the Census Bureau didn't show the MSAs back in 1980. So that shows you how much things are changing and how rapidly it's changing. But as you can see here, New York, we don't think of New York as a really high growth city since 1980, but basically 1.5 million additional people would put it in, what is that, number 7? Number 6, 7, by itself. Los Angeles added 1 million people. You can see some cities in 1980 are no longer there. Anyway, the fact is a lot is happening. And in 30 years, in the last 30 years, the computer wasn't here. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have faxes. I mean, everything is changing. And so when I looked at that and I thought, well, what happened to the companies since 1980? And then you think about the companies that didn't even exist, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, you name it, all these people that, the internet obviously wasn't here as a commercial venture. So all this is showing, and Walmart was a little itty bitty company not many people knew about unless they lived in the Southwest or the Midwest. So change happens much faster than we think it does. And I'm gonna show you some pictures now of some of our master plan communities that really, I think, demonstrate that. So I'm going to show you Summerlin, which it was started in about 1990. The Woodlands started in the early 70s, and Columbia was started in the late 60s. For a frame of reference, Columbia and the Woodlands are 28,000 acres. Manhattan is about 21,600 acres. Both of these are larger than island Manhattan. Columbia's a little bit smaller, it's about 14,000 acres. But I think it's all relevant and talks about the things that were discussed recently by Chris and also by the Media Lab. So Summerlin started, like I said, in 1990, got about 100,000 people living there now. The yellow areas are the areas that have not been developed yet. Okay, they're much smaller than what's already been developed. We have 7,000 acres left. We're gonna double the population of Summerlin probably by the time it's built out, okay? And I'm gonna show you what happened. It's hard for me to see this, but that's showing you just the tip of Summerlin. Summerlin's 10 miles west of the Strip for people that don't know Las Vegas. Las Vegas is an area that is surrounded by property owned by the government, so it's really not gonna grow out anymore. It's gonna start growing up. Summerlin is by far the best place to live in the city. It's only about 10 minutes from the Strip. It'll become the business district for Las Vegas in the near future. This is showing you what happened in 1994, and then this is showing you what's happened in 2015. So if you look, it's hard for me to see this. All you saw in 1980 was this little piece right here. All this has been built. There's over 100,000 people there. There's 4 million feet of office. There's 4 million feet plus or minus of residential retail. There's 150 miles of trails. There's the best public schools and private schools in the state here. Place really didn't even exist 35 years ago. So this shows you what's happening. So what happened is people would move out to the suburbs. Ultimately, there'd be enough people that some retail would follow. Once the retail would follow, ultimately, office and hotels are the last things to show up. This has been consistent with every master plan community in the United States. There could be outliers, but that's generally what happens. This you're looking at is a picture of downtown Summerlin, opened up in October of 2014, 25 years after the founding or the starting. This piece here, this area that's in dirt is gonna have about 10,000 residential units, well, 6,000 to 8,000 residential units, millions of square feet of office, a few 100,000 feet additional retail, and cultural, could even have a baseball stadium. But this will become the downtown of Summerlin. And so what's happening is these master plan communities are sort of mimicking what happened to some of our older cities that have been around for a longer period of time. And these are just some images oh, by the way, this is 1,300,000 feet of retail with a 200,000 square foot office building attached to it. This is the largest retail project that's been built and opened in the United States since the Great Recession, just to give you a frame of reference. And I'm gonna just go through this quickly. The Woodlands, started by George Mitchell in the early 70s, is really a bedroom community in Houston, and it was so far out that people couldn't anticipate that it would become the great success that it is. And in fact, it's interesting when you look at the MSAs now, Houston is number 5, and it says Houston, the Woodlands, Sugarland. So it shows you a place that didn't even really exist much. I'm going to show you what it looked like in 1980 in a second, is now part of the MSA definition. But 100,000 residences, we're going to have a few more residences. This one is much more built out from a residential standpoint, but this will be a much more dense urban environment because this ExxonMobil is building their large campus just south of this, and there'll be a lot more density in the Woodlands because we still have about 1,000 commercial acres of development left, even though our residential acreage is pretty much used up. This shows you what it looked like in 1981. This red outline is the Woodlands. So again, over 25,000 acres, larger than Manhattan. Okay, this is what it looked like in 2015. Let me show you, this is residential development primarily. This area here is the town center where there's a regional mall, very successful. There's some fantastic office complexes here, and right down here, this area right here is where ExxonMobil is today. So if you go, and it just shows you the massive growth that you've seen. Ward Village is not a master plan community, just got some cool images I wanted to show you really quickly. It's in Honolulu, Hawaii. Basically, this is what it looked like in 1927. You can see this is Ala Moana Boulevard. This is the ocean. As you'll see, there's, filling in the shoreline. This is Ala Moana State Park now. This becomes a harbor. This is 1940. Here we go to 1952. You see the harbor starting to take shape. There's a breakwater. Meanwhile, on the land side, you start seeing much more density. There's nothing there. Now there's more buildings and more buildings. In 78, the harbor is now completely built. And you can see today, this is what it looks like. What I have highlighted in yellow is what we call Ward Village. Ward Village right now is about 1 million square feet of retail and some office and industrial space. Ultimately, we're going to add about 8 million feet. So this goes to what we're talking about, more and more density. There's really no place to sprawl here in Honolulu because you're hard up against the mountains on one side and the ocean on the other side. And also, Hawaii is starting to build a heart. It's a rapid transit. It's a monorail that land here at Ala Moana Shopping Center and come through what's called Kaka'aku. And we are now building, and I don't have pictures of them, but we're building high-rise condominiums. And one of the things we're concerned about is building workforce housing. And so we went to Singapore, our company went to Singapore not more than, let's say, within the last month, looking at micro units that have already been built that are similar to what the Media Lab was showing us on the video. We are going to be building these things in the next, could be the next 3 to 5 years. We are searching for ways to build more efficient and more usable residential units that can be put in an urban environment that will provide an economic return, because otherwise they're not going to get built. And so I think the Media Lab video is very timely, and this discussion about how we shape our cities over the next 35 years is right on point, and I hope that we can become part of the resource to check these concepts in the real market, because we have very many places to do this. We're geographically diversified. We're from New York to Hawaii. We're also product diversified, because a lot of this isn't all going to be residential. It's going to be office. It's going to be retail. I haven't even got to the retail yet. Most people here in New York think we're a retail company because of the South Street Seaport. I'm going to show you that in a second. This is the aerial of the space now, and this is what it'll look like. That's how you take 60 acres in Kaka'aku and add 8.5 million feet. This is what it looks like today. That's just with our first 4 buildings. There'll be ultimately 22 high-rise condominiums. And at the base of those condominiums is retail. So that's the urban fabric knit together at the pedestrian realm. So ultimately, we'll have 1 million square feet of retail. They'll be serving roughly 4,500 residential units. That'll also serve as a magnet for all the people that live in the general area for dining and recreation and entertainment. South Street Seaport is something we've been working on here for the last 5 years, and this is really the original waterfront district. And I'm not here to talk about the Seaport per se. It's going to be a fantastic project, but I want to show you how even in Manhattan, the denseness of the cities of the United States has been changing itself over the years. And many people don't understand our current location. We're out in the middle of the East River. Okay, this is in 1600s. There we are in the early 1700s. There's the changing shoreline of lower Manhattan. There you're late, like mid 1700s. There's the early 18. Here you are in the early 1900s, and here you are today. And obviously that big chunk over here on the west side is when the World Trade Center was built and Battery Park City was added. Just to give you a frame of reference, this is the Brooklyn Bridge about right here. So this is Chambers Street South. So what I tell people when we're out talking about the projects we're trying to do now here in New York City is, listen, New York City's been reinventing itself since its birth. And I think the city forms are reinventing themselves, and some are going faster than others. But I believe that there is going to be real progress made in the next few years, because all the things that we're doing are impacting what? Time, okay? We don't have enough time. Even though we have all these things that give us the ability to be more productive. We have the internet. I mean, you can find things out now in seconds you couldn't find in weeks in a library, years ago. And now you can be called any time of the day or night on a mobile phone that you didn't have 30 years ago. In fact, it'd be nice if we could untether it occasionally and get off the grid. And so we sometimes are so busy answering all the various questions and and demands of our time that we don't really take time to think. So I love this whole symposium to talk about how we could think about we move things forward in a different, on a different trajectory. So basically what I'm showing you now is a current shot of Lower Manhattan with a rendering of what our Pier 17 will look like when it's done. And one reason this is happening, the Seaport's happening, is because, talk about reinvention, the buildings in Lower Manhattan, by and large, were for office use. These office buildings were all very old and became basically obsolete, functionally obsolete as office buildings. But what does the market do? The market finds ways to reuse things. And so what the market did here is say, New York is a very expensive place to live. We have all these old office buildings that can't be used really, or the office people don't want to use them, the businesses don't want to use them. So the city made a very smart decision. They said, we're going to let these buildings, certain age buildings, be converted, because otherwise you wouldn't have enough land area to hold the density of the residential buildings. So these buildings already exist. They're developed for residential, because in the city of New York, you can't have more than 12 FAR on a zoning lot, but many of these buildings are much more dense. 12 FAR is floor area ratio to the land. I'm sure you all know that, but I just mentioned it if you didn't. So since, let's say about 2000, a little bit before 2000, Chamber, below Chamber, south of Chamber, you've gone from 6,000 people living there to over 60,000 people today. It's one of the fastest growing communities in Manhattan, in New York especially, and it's got the highest average household income. So, and the two reasons that's happening is, one, the space was available, but two, the public infrastructure that's here with all these lines, I'm trying to get the, you can't really see my pointer, but those are all the subway lines coming through Lower Manhattan. The big pink thing up there is the new transit center that opened about a year ago, Fulton Transit Center, and the blue thing is the South Street Seaport. And between the transit center south is where most of the buildings are, where most of the density is. And I'm gonna plug John George. John George, for all you don't know, is a fantastic restaurateur with many great restaurants around the world. And he decided he was gonna come to South Street Seaport, not only open a great seafood restaurant, but reimagine the Fulton Fish Market, which is in the historic Tin Building that we will eventually reconstruct and open up. There'll be a fantastic new venue for all of New York and everyone that visits this fantastic city. And also McNally Jackson is going to open a bookstore, because it's all about community. This is about serving the people that live, and I think Chris mentioned it, cities are about people. And people want to be places where they feel a sense of community, and that's what the South Street Seaport ultimately becomes for all the people that have moved into Lower Manhattan. And so I want to end this, and I'm going fast because I want to leave time for questions. Columbia, downtown Columbia, Jim Rouse's original master plan community, thinking about it in the 60s. It's between Baltimore and Washington. This is what it looks like today. Unfortunately, I don't have any aerial from 1965 when there was nothing here but basically farms and a few little villages. But right about here is the downtown area. Okay, this is built out. There's 90,000 people living here. Today, we have a 13 million square foot development entitlement to greatly intensify the downtown of Columbia. So this is just another example of the master plan communities reaching their maturation and then realizing there's more to do here. People want to live in a more urban environment. How can we bring more people here? And the way we bring more people here is we build up. And the reason we build up is the infrastructure is already here. It's too expensive for private people. Master plan communities are a huge upfront investment. No different than public agencies trying to build the infrastructure for a new city. So the way we do it typically in the private sector is we have municipal districts, or we have called Melrose in California, where basically the money is spent by the private developer typically, and then it's put on the property tax bills of the people that buy the homes, and that's how ultimately this investment gets paid back. But more and more this is becoming so expensive that we need to greatly increase the density of our cities. New York, for example, could easily increase the density. The great thing about increasing the density is then supply and demand, which is out of whack, goes more into balance, and then the expense of a home becomes more affordable. So we're doing it two ways: increase density and reduce the size of the units, and ultimately you have a more affordable residential opportunity. But here, this is just a function of us being able to do this because we own the property, we have the entitlements. In cities where you don't have this luxury, it's much more difficult to do. And so here it is today. That's what it looks like today. That's what it looked like in about 10 or 15 years. Much earlier than 2050. So I'm going to come back to the questions I started with. And I'm happy to leave them up, and we can talk about them. Obviously, this isn't everything. It's a small piece. But to be able to move forward and make something work economically, you have to start somewhere. And where we're starting is economic viability, practical applications to things that can work today that will make it possible to realize the dreams that you were all dreaming for tomorrow. And that's it. And we do that by thinking big as a company.
Thank you. So maybe we'll just hang out up on stage. So I just want to make a couple observations. If you guys could cue up I had a series of images. Do I have the clicker? Where's the clicker? Sorry to wander around looking for the clicker. So for whoever has a laptop, you can Google image like future of cities or something. It's ridiculous, the stuff that comes up. I mean, some of it's literally ridiculous. But what movie did this come from? Right, Blade Runner. This is like the bad side of Blade Runner town. This is like the Jetsons or something. I mean, look at the urban forms. Vertical, like everything you're saying about vertical, you totally see it. Kind of the planned open space. I'm not sure we'll have so many things flying around, but I don't know if that's anti-gravity or dirigibles, right? There's some ways to integrate traffic and transit. Maybe we'll have cities on the water. That's just pretty buildings. Oh, pretty buildings. A lot of anti-gravity, I guess. I'm not seeing that one by 2050. Literally chunks of the city floating, anti-gravity. So, yeah, some of these things, it's beautiful artistically. This is more of like a hellscape, I think. Kind of Blade Runner with a Coke ad in the middle of it. I think they just gave up on Earth and went to space. This sort of stuff, I mean, I'm very curious. You see this sort of stuff all the time where, like, I don't even know what land tenure and property rights is on that. It's just this mammoth complex, and maybe there's precedent for it in human history, but I'm just gonna. What place is this? Lagos, right? This is literally, there's one, the blue one exists, and the question is, because they've also people who've been pushed off the land, right, who literally live on the water. And so this is like an emerging urban form. There's one of them out there, and they're thinking of building a whole kind of city. That would be downtown Lagos, and where everybody lives. Can you imagine that outside of Manhattan? We just kind of do it out into the Hudson. So anyways, there's urban forms that people can imagine, but it doesn't mean they're ever going to exist, right? There's the economics of it all. There's, planned cities and investment versus like organic cities and how that happens. There's the whole capital cycles issue of, you're getting 30-year money to invest, I guess. I'm not sure how you guys capitalize all that stuff. But, it takes a while to raise the money, build the money, and then amortize the cost of the capital. So things don't just change just because you have a cool design.
There's a rule of thumb in the master plan community business, like the second or third owner makes money.
Second or third owner.
Yeah. So
wow.
But
your investors love
business.
That. Then maybe that's a national park.
Yeah, we are the third owner, so we're making a lot of money.
There you go. All right. So questions. I've got lots of questions, but I want to open this up. So I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the middle. Hit any of them. I'm
hard of hearing, so if they ask me a question, will you let me know what they said?
Oh yeah, if I can hear it. Go ahead. Mike? Is it on? Can we turn the mic on? Okay.
Thank you. Okay, for the Summerlin project in Las Vegas, are you all doing anything special to deal with water, like somehow generating it?
What was the question about Summerlin?
With the Summerlin project, or are you doing anything special with water, like how to generate water?
We right now would say no, we're not. Most of the water is either groundwater or comes from Lake Mead for most of Las Vegas, but we are not. In fact, we have looked at capturing rainwater in Hawaii, but no commercial application at this point.
Next question, just pass the mic to, Dave Kerner.
No, I'm Dave Kerner. Question for you is actually is a good follow-on to the one that was just asked. What assumptions are you making about these master plan communities, these developments, that you would like geographic data to track the validity of those assumptions over time, to make assumptions about water availability, energy availability, economic patterns, finance availability, you name it. Those things shift over the time scale that we're talking about here. So what sort of data sets, what sort of data and information would inform you whether those are changing and whether you have to make some changes in your own plans?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because one of the things we look at data, big data, and we're trying to figure out how to harness it ourselves, not only to inform us as to how we would better serve our ultimate customer, but to answer some of those questions. I would say that we, fortunately, have master plan communities in areas that are already built up, and they have the luxury of being on the grid, so to speak, and don't have to really worry about capacity, because we're attached to a larger community. We're not self-contained, and we're being supported by the local utility companies, whether it be water or power or what have you. So one of our concerns, though, is the capacity, and what we do primarily is to make sure our provider has the capacity to take care of our growth. In Summerlin, for example, we have another 7,000 acres to build. We got 40,000 single-family lots. It's primarily a single-family home market, but we're also going to, as I mentioned in the downtown Summerlin slide, greatly increase the density for residential, especially within that downtown area. We want to make sure that the utility companies can satisfy that demand. And so far, we have no reason to believe they can't. But clearly that's a concern for us.
Who's got a hand up? Let's try, I'll totally delegate this to the good-looking man with the mic.
Thank you. My Italian voice comes out all over this thing.
Very nice voice.
You are the third or fourth person today to mention the millennials, the shift in millennials becoming the majority population. I'm one of those. I'm challenged by finance, whether it's buying a home, whether it's paying off school loans, whether it's just cost of living in general that goes up over time. Are the planned cities that you guys are designing taking that into account? Are you adjusting for affordability requirements that the millennials have when you plan your cities and design these urban spaces? Because that's extremely important to us and the rest of my generation.
Sure. Well, each community is a little bit different, okay? So for example, the Woodlands, well, to answer the question more succinctly, yes, okay, and we're doing this by being able to provide a product to everyone. We don't want to be excluding anyone. And obviously, we want to attract the largest core audience, which is the millennial. The millennial doesn't necessarily have an affordability problem in general. To date, millennials have necessarily not wanted to buy homes. They've been renting homes. Now this is different in different cities. Clearly, in New York, it's a little bit different than in let's say Peoria, Illinois, because the thing about it is interest rates are so low right now, okay, that the price of the home for the millennial, many of them, if they're not single, they're married, they got dual income, and maybe they don't have kids yet because they're still paying off loans, and they're really, as a group, are fairly conscious budget-wise. And so I think it's a function of the products haven't been built for them yet that they really want. They're not in the right places. They're not in the right, there's not enough critical mass for them to be looking at it as a community, for example. Maybe I'm not making sense, but the home building industry is not really sure how best to approach the millennial. I think that's, and it's evolving, okay? But ultimately, I think home starts are down 25% off of the 30-year average. Why is that, okay? And it's for some of the things I've just mentioned. Millennials are renting more than buying. And why are they doing that? Because they're starting their families later, by and large. So all these things are a cultural shift I mentioned earlier in household formation, and the market is adjusting. But clearly we're trying to satisfy the demand when it is there, whether it is rental or for sale for that particular buyer or renter or customer. Yes, we are.
Well, it seems to me, I mean, you can find another person, but I'll ask a question. It seems to me there's this interaction of kind of like these demographic issues of cohorts of people coming in with certain expectations and certain characteristics, et cetera. And then there's actual like architectural forms that the market locks in on. So I look at like the late 1800s in New York City and the Lower East Side, you know, they stood up thousands of tenements. And it's an architectural form. You can go to the Tenement Museum downtown. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. But it was so people could live together in a very specific form, in a very specific way, and it supported a certain, in that case, immigrant demographic that was coming in that had a certain economic buying power, et cetera. And it seems like the markets and the demographics kind of have this, you know, back and forth where there's these needs, and that urban form, in that case a tenement, makes sense for them. And next thing you know, you've got 30 blocks of tenements. You know?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to go into a political argument or
Not
discussion.
that tenements are bad.
Okay,
like people needed a place to live.
But supply and demand is real. Okay, supply and demand. If you don't have a lot of supply and there's a big demand, price goes up. Okay, so there's a reason we have affordability problems where there's cities with rent control. Okay, it actually exacerbates the exact thing the communities are trying to do. You want affordable housing? Let developers build more housing. That's what I'll say about that.
Next question. Yes, sir.
I love political geography and global climate change. I have creative thinking. Next 40 years, there will be major problem with climate change. It will be no more ice in North Pole. The water will light and flood into the New York City. There will be wet because of male issues for food, water, and electricity. But we need to desalination useful for taking water would be better.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually, you know, so on the climate change, you know, point, you know, as water rises, I don't know if you can go back to my little slide deck thing, but there's one future city that's built on like an atoll out in the ocean. And there's probably like 5 inches of difference between where the city is and where the ocean is. Not sure how that one's going to survive. But that's like a future vision, right? So we have all of these cities that are in littoral areas, New York City, Honolulu. How do you guys think about, how do investors think about climate change and sea level rise and the cities that are most attractive to people who want to buy?
Yeah, we're a public company. We don't think quarterly. We think long term. Cities, by and large, force developers to think long term because we have to build things that stay out of floodplains, for example. Here in New York City, after Superstorm Sandy, FEMA put out some preliminary flood maps, and before they were actually finalized, New York adopted them. And so now we have to build to these maps, and everything we're building at the Seaport, for example, is above the new floodplain, you know, and we're actually above the 100-year flood, and not, I don't know about the 500-year, you know, it's too, what's the
extreme or absurd?
Well, it's too far out for us to really focus on. But the 100-year flood, we're above it. Cities are very, I can tell you that we are focused on it. It's real, okay? But you have to balance what is economically feasible today with how you protect yourself for the future impact that we know will happen. It's no different than demographics. I mean, we know people are going to age and certain things are going to happen, and we're going to have a senior housing shortage, quite frankly, in this country. But the question is, when does the market react, and how can it react economically? And that's the issue with the climate change. I mean, as we're building things, we are doing what we can today to be ready for the inevitable rise in the sea level, but we can't be building things that are going to be, because it's not economically viable. Let's just be, honest with one another. We can't do things that are going to be, reacting to things that might happen in centuries, but decades. Clearly, we can and we should.
Next question, Frank.
Sir, can you comment on new building practices and ideas that are out there in construction or other things? I mean, beyond LEED certification and things that will get a big rah-rah here. Integrated renewable energy, wind and PV systems, 3D printed houses, modular skyscrapers that are put together with an air gun and not a welder. Are we stuck in concrete and steel forever, or are there innovative minds in the construction industry that are going to move forward for 2050?
I hope we're not stuck there forever. We are looking at other ways to build faster, cleaner, more sustainably. Things are happening here in New York. I mean, it's not our project. Fork City is doing a modular project with Pacific Park. And, the modular thing it's a speed thing. I don't know if it speaks to sustainability as much as it does cost and speed, but we are searching for ways. I would tell you that as a company, we would welcome a way to do things that would speak to many things you're talking about. At the same time, though, we need to focus on things that are economically viable. This is why I love what the Media Lab's doing, what they did in Singapore with these micro units, because you can effectively take something that's 200 or 300 square feet, and by moving things around, have effectively a 600, 700, 800 square foot unit. And what that does is it reduces the amount of materials we need to be able to satisfy that housing unit, which speaks to a lot of the things you were just mentioning, without creating new ways to build things. It's just be a smarter way to put them together. And I think that things are going to happen that we can't possibly foresee. 35 years ago, sitting here talking about what we have today, I think it's beyond our wildest imagination what we have today. And so I hope that all these things happen. A lot of smart people in the business working on this, yes. And ultimately, to the extent they can be implemented with market dynamics, we would embrace them with open arms. We have the largest LEED certified project of its kind in Hawaii. That's Ward Village. I think it might be the largest LEED certified community in the country. I'm not sure on that one. But we also, Woodlands was founded by George Mitchell, and it was the core value has been sustainability. The Woodlands, if you drive through, you saw it from the air, but if you drive through at ground level, raise your hand if you've been to the Woodlands. Okay, you drive around at ground level, you can't see the buildings of all the trees that are there. I mean, it's a great example of how we're trying to, grow commerce and have larger communities, but still be concerned about the environment. And, for example, we have a bald eagle in the middle of the Woodlands and 300 acres around it, and made sure we kept it there, and it's still there, and we're very proud of the fact that it is. And so, we're not a slash and burn, developer, dark side, all these other things that people like to say about developers. We want to be authentic, we want to be true to the places we are, and we want to also, though, provide a return for our shareholders, because that's ultimately why we exist.
Next question.
We've had a very sunny November here in New York, but if you've been here and tried to find the place in the sun in Manhattan, it becomes very difficult. The sun is very low in November, and we have all kinds of new tall buildings which have no class at all, and there are very few places in Midtown Manhattan where you can sit in the sun. except if you're in your living room from the 30th floor higher up.
Right.
The Woolworth building in Lower Manhattan is now surrounded on 3 sides by taller buildings, and you can't see it. There are skyscrapers going up in Brooklyn that are also doing the same thing. It's happening in Flushing, Queens, where I live. All over the world, in places like Singapore and Hong Kong, and many of the Asian places that you've shown in various of the speeches today, huge skyscrapers emulating the New York of 60, 70 years ago. In places like Singapore, it's not that much of a problem because the sun is overhead a lot of the year. In New York, the sun is overhead in July, and that's when you get the sun, and you don't want it. And in Manhattan, the trees are puny because they don't get enough sunshine. Any comments?
Well, and I mean, I think I'd also throw, I mean, you made 2 comments. One is kind of the darkness that the height and the density can throw, but also the lack of character. My brother's kind of a design bigot, I guess I'd say, and he's always like, look, design isn't that expensive. Good design isn't that expensive, so why do we have so many crap-looking buildings? New York's heyday was when we had a massive influx of Central and Southern European immigrant craftsmen, that you could just strap on the side of every building and chisel it into beauteousness, if that's a word or not.
Well,
anyways, I think those 2 things are somehow interrelated.
Well, good design does not have to be more expensive than bad design, but you need a really talented architect.
Yeah.
Because most people just spend money. They spend money to make good design. It really takes talented architect to have good design on a budget. Right. I'll say that. But as far as the density goes, I would actually make an argument the other direction. If you got a 5-story, 6-story, 7-story building, and you're walking down the street, because the streets are narrow here, okay? And the buildings are already built, and they're not going to get torn down and have shorter buildings. What I would argue is you have higher densities in New York City and keep the parks and the open spaces you do have, or even make more open space if possible, somehow. How would you do that? Well, Battery Park has a lot of open space. It didn't exist before 1970-something, before they started filling in the Hudson River because of the World Trade Center. There's been talk of something called Seaport City, which would be on the East River side of Lower Manhattan, and you could actually protect against future climate change and also have larger open space. There's decisions that have to be made. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Either you gotta make room for the people that wanna live in New York City. Remember the thing I showed earlier about since 1980, 1.5 million people have moved here, and more people wanna be here. And the only way you're gonna house them is to go up, or they're gonna go out, and they're not gonna be in New York City. And some people do that, but most people wanna stay here. So you can't change where you are on the globe. Can't help you with the sun, so.
So before the next question, we really haven't talked anything about mobility as urban forms around mobility. We saw the self-folding cars, which
I don't
is
know
cool,
about that. I love the whole idea about, because, you city bike and you get up in the morning and there's no bike there because they're all in, somewhere else in the.
So bicycles could be like the urban form of 2050, right?
But what about the driverless car? You talk about what happens with the driverless drones. We haven't even talked about drones and how drones are going to be delivering packages or other things. I mean, there's so many things that can happen that change the way we think about where we live and how we interact with the city. Driverless cars is an interesting thing because one of the reasons people don't want to drive very far away from where they are, working and living, et cetera, is because they're in a car and it tends to be a fairly inefficient place for people to be. You listen to radio, maybe you listen to a book or, but you can't read, can't do anything. If you're in a car and you could really do something, it takes the place of the subway and the train, okay, where you have real density. There are places in the United States where you don't have that kind of density, but if you have a driverless car, that could change things. That could be interesting.
A shared driverless car even. So,
yeah. Well, that's
things
the
like
bus,
the Hyperloop.
Right? The shared driverless car is the bus.
Well, one of the lead engineers of Tesla left to go do an electric driverless bus company. Yeah. Right? I mean, it's like, yep, Tesla's great for kind of rich people who like stylish renewable energy cars, but what about everybody else? So
Let me say, if you have a fantastic idea, let Chris Tucker know. He'll get a hold of me, and if there's a way to test this application in the marketplace, we're happy to do it. I mean,
well, there you go. Write that in your little passport book, people. No. So we got about 5 more minutes. We got a question in the back from Councilor Alec Murphy.
Yeah, the last question, and in fact a few of the earlier ones, suggest that context matters. And it's interesting, when we think geographically, we of course think about mapping and the kinds of insights that come from mapping, but thinking geographically is also to think about differences from place to place. I was on a lecture tour in China last spring, and I would show a picture to various student audiences of the skyline of Doha. And they'd all be scratching their head wondering which new Chinese city this was.
Which brand new Chinese city?
Exactly, right. And of course it wasn't anywhere close to China. But what's happened is a certain kind of placeless vision of what a modern city is going to look like is taken everywhere without much sensitivity to local bioclimatic circumstances. What constitutes an environment that encourages community in one place or another? What sorts of transportation options there are in one place as opposed to another? And so it's really in the realm of a comment, but I think one of the challenges, if we're going to think about a sustainable urban future in the way that we were encouraged to think about this morning, together with these really innovative and interesting ideas about urban developments, is how to take context seriously, how to take the differences from place to place seriously, to design the kinds of urban projects that really work in a place-aware way rather than a place-less way.
No, personally, I think that's a great point because, we kind of study geography as though it was handed down from the gods in a way. And, geography is created by people over waves and waves of investment and years and decades of that. The architects and the urban planners will talk about placemaking and, the art of placemaking. And geographers, I think, do think about the multidimensionality of these places. I'd love to see a stronger bridge, and maybe, David Kaplan can show me where that bridge already exists. But, between the geographers and the urban planners and the designers, because there's so many lessons to be learned by what geographers study and how they study it. And somehow I'm not sure that totally informs all the designers and the people coming up with the beautiful forms of the future. Do you have a comment, or you want me to open it up again?
Open it up.
Open it up. Got 3 minutes. He keeps telling me exactly how many minutes we have. Yep, right there. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. I'd like to ask you to expand a little bit about some of the things you were saying about market dynamics, so you would build more sustainably when the market dynamics are there. And what I think is super important also is you have to create opportunities for shareholders. And so maybe if you could speak a little bit more about the financial mechanisms that would need to be there for sustainable kind of urban forms. But also, a lot of these urban forms haven't been built. And so how do you do, a lot of market analysis is done on precedents. So how do you kind of show to shareholders that something can be profitable and worth investing in if you don't have precedent with which to do market analysis?
That's a hard one.
Well, I didn't hear it all. I heard the part about the market dynamics.
Well, let's take our last point on market precedents.
What was the question? But how can we test market feasibility if no precedent? What'd you say about that?
If an urban form is new and there's no precedent for the development, how can you kind of do market analysis and get investment from kind of the financial sector?
Okay, well, I would say that the urban form, as far as we're concerned, okay, the element that you're talking about would not be built by us unless it was economically feasible in the market. Now, it's different to test a micro unit in let's say a 100-unit workforce housing project in Hawaii, for example, to see if it worked. And if it worked, we could take it elsewhere and do that. But to spend, pick a number, hundreds of millions of dollars, because, we're talking about city forms, they typically are going to be that kind of numbers. I can't imagine a company undertaking that kind of cost without having a reasonable expectation that there would be a commensurate risk-adjusted return. Now, the way that could change is if there was a public-private partnership whereby a private entity took a chance on confirming or finding out that it's not economically viable, and if they were rewarded by being able to build something, if it was successful, that would compensate them for taking the risk that it's not economically viable. That's just a business proposition someone would have to take, and it's too hypothetical for me to be specific on my answer. But that's how I see it happening. Ultimately, the market's going to determine which forms take shape and which don't. Right. I mean, I believe what's going to happen.
But to your point, with public-private partnerships, there's opportunity for society and the government to provide incentives to take a risk in a direction they think might be more sustainable, at least on a small basis, to prove whether a new idea works or doesn't work, whether it has the desired impact.
We make those choices every day. For example, we've got a tunnel. We've been arguing about the tunnels going under Hudson River because the tunnels were built over 100 years ago and they haven't been replaced. And these are infrastructure costs that private companies can't cover. This is what the role of government has to do. And private enterprise can help, but infrastructure decisions have to be made by the community as a whole, and ultimately governmental agencies have to do this. And New York wouldn't exist as it does today without the infrastructure that investments have been made, and the infrastructure investments have to keep being made for these new forms to take shape. And I believe some of these new forms are going to take shape in the existing cities that we have. That's the easiest place for us to test these forms.
Well, thank you very much. Please give a round of applause.